Good evening to all of you. This is Praveen Rani from Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we are starting with a virtual seminar on financing recovery for resilient and sustainable cities. It's an initiative which is supported by UN Habitat. And in the beginning, I would request the Director General of Bombay Chamber, Mr. Sandeep Khosla, to offer the welcome address.
Yeah, thanks, Praveen. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all our participants and panelists on behalf of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Today's theme, as Praveen has just mentioned, is financing recovery for resilient and sustainable cities. We have a high-powered panel of experts to share their views. The Chamber, in association with the United Nations Human Settlement Program, brings you this virtual seminar, which will give us a perspective on the economic recovery, including how different cities across the US and Europe are coping with the COVID situation. I thank each one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and request you to make this session as interactive as possible. You may post your questions in the Q&A section, which is which will be taken up towards the end of this session. Before I hand over to my colleague, let me take a couple of minutes to brief you all on the activities of the Chamber. Bombay Chamber has been playing a proactive role in India's development for the last 183 years. In fact, next week we turn 184. The Chamber serves as an effective vehicle of communication between regulatory bodies, the corporate world, and society at large. I have the privilege to mention that a lot of our members here are have been with us for a long time. In fact, 14 of them are been a member of the Chamber for over 100 years. The Chamber serves as an effective vehicle of communication between regulatory bodies, and the Chamber's main area of operation include advocacy in almost all areas, both at the government as well as the judiciary. The Chamber has many subcommittees with eminent members who regularly interpret new notification and laws apart from the state and annual budget. These committees take feedback from members and make representation to the government. BCCI conducts over 100 seminars every year, and since the lockdown has conducted over 50 webinars in the last 3 months alone. A lot of these were focused on the MSME sector. The Chamber has also helped their members in facilitation of business visas and issuing certificate of origin for exporters. In fact, the Chamber has been the first chamber to start issuing digital certificates. The Chamber has a labor advisory wing, which plays a crucial role in employee relations, and in recent years has added a mediation wing. One of the recent activities related to the COVID pandemic, we appeal to our members for contribution towards helping the COVID warriors in government hospitals, where resources, as you all know, are always a challenge. From the generous contribution of our members, Bombay Chamber was able to supply much needed equipment and consumable to 6 hospitals in Mumbai. That's the JJ Hospital, KEM, Kasturba, Sion Hospital, Nair Hospital, and Vashi Municipal Hospital. So thank you for your patience, and now may I hand this session over to Praveen to introduce the speakers. Praveen, over to you.
Thank you, Sandeep ji. We have got very eminent speakers who belong to various sectors. Somebody from finance, somebody from technology, somebody from consulting, some from bureaucracy, and also from urban planning and research. So I would like to start with the introductions with Mr. Parthasarathy, who is fondly known as Partha and is the president of the mobility services sector of Mahindra Group. Mobility services sector houses a range of businesses that provide innovative technology-driven solutions for efficient movement of people and goods. Partha is a member of Mahindra's supervisory board called Group Executive Board. He is the chairman of the board of Mahindra Logistics Limited, Smart Shift Logistics Private Limited, Meru Travel Solutions. He is also director on the board of several other listed companies of Mahindra Group, such as Tech Mahindra Limited and Mahindra Financial Services Limited. Partha sir is a much awarded professional, a thought leader, and a votary of transformational changes with over 3 decades of experience. He was awarded with the Lifetime Achievement Awards for both CFO and CIO roles. In addition to being the president of Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, he is also chairman of FICCI Council on Sustainable Mobility and co-chair for OECD's MNET Business and Sustainability Working Group. Our second speaker is Ms. Anjali Bansal. Anjali Bansal is the founder of Avana Capital. She is also the former non-executive chairperson of Dena Bank. Anjali ma'am chairs Niti Aayog's Investment Council for Fintech and Women Entrepreneurship. She has previously global partner and managing director with TPG Growth PE and strategic consultant with McKinsey and Company. She started her career as an engineer. She is an active investor and mentor in companies like Nyaka, Auburn Company, Lone Tap, Darwin Box, and serves as an independent and non-executive director on the board of several leading companies, including Tata Power, Siemens, Bata, and Delivery. She is a charter member of TIE. She has been listed as one of the most powerful women in Indian businesses by India's leading publication, Business Today, and by Fortune India. Our third speaker, Dr. Vatsal Bhatt. Dr. Bhatt is the Vice President for Communities at the US Green Building Council, where he helped conceptualize and make cities and lead for communities rating systems. For more than 20 years, he has been working as a thought leader in climate change mitigation, energy policies, and sustainable cities. For 17 years, as a senior energy policy analyst at the Brookhaven National Laboratory, Dr. Bhatt has worked on various national and international assignments for energy system analysis and low carbon development for the US Department of Energy, the US Department of State, and the US Environmental Protection Agency, the National Science Foundation, various universities, foundations, and international governments. He has developed energy, water, climate change systems modeling for long term national, regional, and urban analysis. Coming to Mr. Unhare, Mr. Unhare has a rich 23 years experience into urban governance, focusing on urban infrastructure, urban poverty alleviation, sanitation, and smart cities. He has worked into e-governance and public policy issues in sustainable development and livable cities, connecting philanthropy, international developmental agencies, CSR, and sustainable development goals in cities. Martin Grisel, one of the key driver for this webinar, is a director of European Urban Knowledge Network, a network of national ministries in the EU responsible for urban matters, which is based in Netherlands. Martin has been involved in urban policy and research since 2004, when he founded the EUKN and has been closely involved in the establishment of strategic urban agendas like the Leipzig Charter for Sustainable European Cities 2007, the Urban Agenda for EU 2016, the New Urban Agenda 2016. Sustainable urban development and COVID 19 recovery are key themes in the UKN. Between 2020 24, Martin will coordinate a Horizon 2020 project to generate and exchange knowledge on nature based solutions in both EU and South America. Mr. Srinivas Kawalegi is a partner, Smart Cities and Urban Transformation, Government and Transaction Advisory Services at Ernst & Young, India. As the urban sector leader for EY in India, he provides oversight and strategic guidance for EY's work in municipal services and urban infrastructure. With over 20 years of core consulting experience across Southeast Asia and South Asia, he has pioneered application of technology-led solutions to improving municipal operations performance and evidence-based decision support. Srinivasji is consulting, currently leading multiple engagements in India in helping civic bodies with respect to municipal taxes, project deliveries, and capital expenditure. He is also currently providing strategic inputs on Government of India's leading initiatives such as maturity model for integrated command and control centers, data smart strategy for cities, and smart innovation, etc. Prior to joining EY, Srinivasji was associated with IBM Global Services and PwC. So this is the brief introduction of our speakers. And now I would request Mr. Parthasarathy to do the theme setting for today's session.
Am I audible? Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Praveen. And let me add my very warm welcome to that of our DG. And on behalf of BCCI, I welcome all of you. Good morning and good evening to depending on good afternoon, depending on which part of the world are you coming from. So very happy to have it, whether it's, they say the sun never sets. In the virtual world, at least it's particularly true. And that is without any expansionist happenings there. So very quickly coming to the theme, urbanization is a challenge and an opportunity for advancing sustainable development. I often wonder whether countries like India are fortunate, like we did skip the mainframe in the IT chronology to directly leapfrog to PCs, whether we can leapfrog in development also to something much more sustainable and much more of broader theme as we go on. That's both a hope and a wish. Okay, but there are huge challenges of housing, challenges of access to public transport, challenges of good water, and the amount of diarrhea and cholera that comes in the way of is not funny. The numbers I don't want to quote because there are experts who will talk about it. And add to it, transportation and public spaces is a challenge. UN Habitat thinks they need 38 trillion for a 10-year period to take care of these needs across the globe. And that's a big amount of money. But that does not address health. So we have to now with COVID add health as a separate layer and what needs to be done on the health portion. So our task is cut out. Okay. So our aim is to develop resilient cities, and resilient, whether I don't know whether we can be resilient, make them resilient from COVID, but we can certainly make them resilient to take care of any such eventualities and unknown when we come to it. The approaches and ideas can be like this: community owned and community driven sustainable urban planning. I was just wondering that housing society seems to thrive, cooperative housing society seems to thrive, right? And the housing leadership in the society leadership takes care of the housing. Why can't we do that for the cities and for our country from this perspective, urban planning perspective? Seems to be a good idea. Think economics ecologically and ecology economically. So this would be another big thought in terms of saying how do we look at it. Innovation, technology, and entrepreneurs would be a key enabler. Let me be very clear, none of this is my idea. I've just borrowed whatever looked very nice to be able to put it. But what could be original is saying that we can bring the experts that you see on the panel to talk to you more about it, to make this a reality. And I think that's where the magic lies. The words are words, but when we put them to action, then we will have a lot. And we have had some good examples. Let's take electricity in Mumbai. When it came to be a very good thing, and now in Delhi. So there is urban, good things happening. Mahindra World City put up in Chennai over 3,500 acres was the first smart city before smart cities were thought about, right? And it did all the good things. Okay, it did build a smart, sustainable, resilient city, but it doesn't solve world problem. We have to do more. If you look at that, Jaipur came in and said, we want another world city in Jaipur. We did that too. But these are small examples of what can be possible, but this needs to be done on a large scale. That's our problem. Okay. However, massive scale requires one thing, which is finance. And there are three truths about finance. One, nothing can be achieved without it. Two, supply is plentiful. That's clear. That's the second truth. Third, for development, it's not so easily available. So that's the third truth. So now we need to kind of figure out how do we make that available for development. And the straight answer is we have to make what we call as subnational governments creditworthy. So easier said than done. So how easy is it to make them creditworthy? I don't know. But if we are all credit worthy individually, then together the citizens can uplift the entire ecosystem. So we can recognize root cause, and that will be that reliable revenue models are not available. Security and contract enforcement is not available, and governance confidence is low. So if we can address these three in some form, and I hope Martin and Vatsal will talk a lot more about these things of successes. We can also talk about structural solutions that need attractions. What kind of tax concessions? When we can make locations better by offering tax concession, should we not look at this area or function as a tax concession area so that it attracts investment? So should we also look at reliable revenue streams for governments? Should we look about framework for securitization? And should we look at governance framework of audit and credit rating? I also thought, how about, making government look at the best city? China, grades its cities. Is it time that we all started rating the cities on this, especially the financing aspect? Finances could be augmented by, putting a development cess on real estate. And you also, oh no, not one more cess. But if we do it on actual gain and not on non-realized gain, then maybe it will be worth putting that effort in order to do it. And elite assets are there in every metro. Is it being utilized to get good revenue for the government? Sponsorship, and there is huge amount of CSR which is available. But if we have to tap it and get that. So these are two sides of a coin. While economic returns are important, global community should appreciate the strength of the weakest link. And therefore, they are also in a mood to do. We have to make them want to do together. And I think that is when we make ourselves credit worthy later, worthy first, and then we can have the boom loop going or a good loop going than before that. What I want to therefore leave this list talk, I would say, because anything else would be overstating, is with three clear messages. Credit worthiness and fiscal management issues need to be addressed to attract capital, and do not let a good crisis like what we have today go to waste, and use this as a change opportunity. And current times demand swifter action, and it is not for one party to do it. All of us have to come together to do it. The best time to do this was 20 years back, but that's history. So the next best time is today. Thank you. And back to Praveen, you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Parthasarathy. Thanks a lot. A lot of inspiration for the rest of the webinar. And now I would request Mr. Vatsal Bhatt, to start with his presentation and take the discussion ahead.
Thank you all. Let me get the discussion started with this slide deck, and we'll try to talk through it, though there are a lot of slides. So thank you, Mr. Parthasarathy. Thank you, Bombay Chamber, for bringing us all together. And as Mr. Parthasarathy said, none of us are experts of everything, and we have our own role cut out. So I mainly focus on urban systems for all these times. So I'll talk about that. And financial recovery is quite a lot to the helm of experts that we have in the panel. So I'll mainly talk about the issues that we face here in US, and obviously our programs, how they are doing. So we have all known that most of the cities have shut down all these times. And it has really created a lot of shortfalls in budgets, as well as ways in which cities and communities operate all throughout. Especially in US, that's a big challenge, because as you can see, all the cities are finding it quite difficult. There are a lot of surveys being done, and those surveys say that most of the communities, 98% of the communities, are feeling this pain. So I think this is just one example of city of Philadelphia, where Drexel University did some kind of analysis, and you can see the staggering numbers. It's just one city which has the budget of $5 billion, and you can see how much is the loss that they are hopefully facing. Hopefully that loss becomes smaller, but this is just estimate. We all know that obviously businesses are feeling the pain, but even city officials are feeling the pain, because city officials or city workers who are most essential are going to face the most brunt. As you can see in the backdrop, the fire agency, health and safety, sanitation workers, all are going to be facing, and there are major layoffs being carried out in last 3-4 months. You can see that there have been encouraging signs, but still many of these plans have fallen quite short. As Mr. Parthasarathy was talking about, this is a very well-known cartoon that, all the decision makers are trying to find the right solution. but it's really hard because we have too many cooks in the kitchen. And I think this happens to any city, any community, any nation. And we have Mr. Unhale and other experts who can talk about it. Nonetheless, when we are trying to invest all this humongous amount of money, we are trying to bring our economies back. We're trying to build jobs. At the same time, we're trying to make it sustainable. We need to really see that how cities and their systems are functioning. What can we do right now to take care of long-term issues? This is just one big jolt, one big shock to the economy, to the way we all have been living, playing and working together. But I think the point is, can we look into the long-term effects when we are trying to invest a lot of efforts in now rebuilding, recovery, reshaping, and so on and so forth? Can we build it sustainable? Can we build it resilient, and so on and so forth? So here, the point is to really trigger the investment in such a way that changes our behavior, that changes our consumption patterns, that it changes the way in which we think about utilizing resources, and so on and so forth. And we have seen many of such surveys have been done in recent past, and everybody or majority of them are saying that it needs to be more sustainable. So at US Green Building Council, we have launched this program, Lead for Cities and Communities, which has been launched in December 2016, and now 110 global cities and communities have been certified. This is an example of Hoboken in New Jersey, where Mayor Bhalla received this plaque, but his predecessor, Mayor Don Zimmer, did a lot of good work so that Mayor Bhalla could take the credit for that and continue that good work. So this is just a snapshot of the Lead for Cities and Communities rating system that we have developed and we are trying to operationalize. It is trying to look into holistic aspects of integrated planning, natural systems, transportation, land use, water, energy, solid waste, as well as quality of life and innovation. Our interest is to really talk about this discussion holistically. So whether we talk about recovering from pandemic or designing systems more sustainability and resilience, we need to look into all these things in a comprehensive manner. People and people's well-being and inclusiveness should be at the center, and all other aspects are merging into it in terms of improving our health and well-being, at the same time, safety, economic prosperity, and other systems and services. We need to look into social and economic equality in a much different manner, much different lens. There are a lot of different perspectives going on, especially from US. You might have seen in last 4 months, we have seen a lot of upheavals, a lot of ups and downs, and racial equity, or at the same time, health and quality of life, quality of education of many people has been at stake. These have been some of the demonstrations we have seen, even though the pandemic has been going on and unfolding in a quite devastating manner. We have seen that these are systemic issues, not one-time issues, not just cropped up overnight, but these are systemic issues. And these issues are common everywhere, all across the world. Whichever region, country, community that you represent, these are there, inherent. So it's not only about US, it's about globally. Some of these issues, we need to really look into it and see how do we make a systemic change. So we, coming from the urban systems background, we feel that each and every sector needs to be looked into it while we are trying to rebuild, recover, and so on and so forth. I work in energy systems analysis for all these years, and I believe that buildings, transportation, energy, water, waste needs to be efficient. At the same time, we should be deploying a lot of renewable energy all across. Whether these are old buildings that we see here in United States, especially Rockefeller Center that many of you must have visited in New York City, or we talk about advanced companies like Google and others who are right now harvesting a lot of our data and doing a lot of our humongous data intensive work. They are also trying to talk about how do they load shift? How do they really look into their patterns of operating? And we talked about behavioral change. This is about behavioral change, and they are trying to make that change by good analysis. We need to do that all across. We know that resilience has been a big issue, and we need to really try to capture it in a larger way. When we are trying to talk about world cities, world communities, we know so many of them are feeling this crunch. We have seen here in US, so many communities built on the edge of a war, on the edge of a new disaster waiting to happen. They are facing all these issues. It's not about that kind of calamity, but even man-made. Many of us still remember the BP oil spill and the environmental and health impacts it made all across. So here we can talk about nature-based solutions, and nature-based solutions can really try to help us. This is one interesting graphic. I don't need to go into details, but we all know that nature-based solutions are a big part of what we do. Detroit, Mr. Partha can relate to it probably, that it's recovering, and a lot of economic impetus is going back into Detroit. That's the time we also need to talk about urban agriculture, food. How can we reduce all the cost that has been spent in transporting food from one part of the continent to the other part of the continent? This is an interesting example when we are talking about nature-based solutions. We are working with Porto Nuovo district in Milan, and these are two buildings being built by Stefano Boeri architect. He is phenomenally changing the urban landscape by building such buildings all across the world. However, when we look back, whether we talk about New York City or we talk about Washington, D.C., mayors and decision makers are trying to make small changes all across the discussion. And this is just one example about public spaces and how we can create public spaces, how we can utilize public spaces, and try to emphasize various aspects of equality and social cohesion in this particular discussion. Most of these graphics are very well known to people like us who come from India, but at the same time, these issues are common everywhere. Everywhere. It's not only India. And I think that's where we try to talk about some of the systems that are very advanced. This is a community, Songdo, in South Korea near Incheon that we are working with. They are trying to use this advanced system. It doesn't mean that each and every community can have it, but the point is to really start looking into some of these solutions that can really help us go 1 mile further. This is a great example of us trying to make supply chains more efficient. At the same time, we can try to reutilize, reuse, reduce at the same time, try to really talk about circular economy. Water is a big issue, we know, all across the world, and some of the cities are feeling the pinch. Bangalore and many of our cities in India are in that discussion. However, we need to really look into it and start finding out how do we talk about cohesion in the policy discussion. We know in US, the consumption is the highest. So here also, we are trying to find out ways in which we can reduce it. You probably know that California faced a big drought in last 10 years, and the governor tried to change a lot of policy discussion, and that has happened over 2 years. They could reduce the water use to 2/3 of what it could be. Now, in post-COVID discussion, in the new normal, most of us are working from home, and we are seeing that that's going to change the discussion. At the same time, many of our cities have this public transit, but that has been the source, at least in this pandemic, for many of the transmission of the disease. So here you can see that in US, you can see all the graphs going down, the way in which people started using it less and less. There are various ways in which we can improve it. We can give more preference to other mobility, smart mobility, micro mobility, and so on and so forth. These are few examples from one of our certified cities in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that has a lot of alternative fuel vehicles all across. So our discussion today is going to be focusing more with the experts during the panel about finance and how can we do it. So I just wanted to put one such example here and end my discussion here that yes, there are a lot of innovative ways being shaped, and we would want to talk about it during our panel discussion today. Thank you so much. So with this, we will start the panel discussion, and I will start asking the questions. The kind of format we will follow is pretty simple. We are going to go across all the panelists, and we are going to ask them questions that we have predetermined. And we hope that each and every panel member would not take more than 1.5 minutes to provide their answers. And I think we would try to have a very enriching discussion throughout this process. With this, I would like to start with Mr. Parthasarathy. Mr. Parthasarathy, you have provided a very interesting beginning to this session today. Now, can you please elaborate, how do we ensure supply chains would become more efficient to take care of urban requirements as well as rural demands? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What we need to think of after the pandemic especially is to have a R3, which is restore. We have to bring safety, stabilize service, collaborate, and manage cash flow. So these are 4 things. So the restore is the first thing of the supply chain. The next one is rethink. Evaluate current capability and think about how to balance cost, service, and flexibility, because this again would change along with this. And redesign is the third one, because for the long term, developing commercial and operating models to draw on next generation capabilities and partnership will be easy. And therefore, if you had to use, supply chains are getting consolidated, technology driven, end-to-end solution, collaboration, clean, and most importantly, sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. I made a big mistake, and I forgot to let Martin go after me. So sorry for that. Martin, please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Parthasarathy.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm trying to set up my screen to share it with you. And it doesn't seem to work. Is it? Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah. Is it correct? You see my screen now? Okay, perfect. Yes, Vatsal, I was indeed wondering what was happening, but thank you. Although I must say that in a way, you already gave my presentation also, because I can say, I can only say that I fully agree with what you said, and there will be an overlap between what you just presented and what I also wanted to present from a more, let's say, European perspective. But in that sense, I mean, you're already working in the US for quite some time. It's interesting that with a global audience from India, Europe, in my case, you working in the US, and participants from all over the world, I am really happy that we share to a large extent the same vision about how we need to get out of this crisis and what would be the real way forward. And this is also the title of my presentation. I would like to see this crisis indeed as an opportunity, as a catalyst for change, to really invest in a much more sustainable future. Because I think if this pandemic shows anything, it works like a magnifying glass, revealing to us the let's say the vulnerabilities of society and the weak points really in our economic and urban structures. Let me quickly show you the spread of the virus. I mean, this is not new for you, but in Europe, we are in a situation where in most of the countries, although it varies from almost from day to day, we're getting now, at least in the Netherlands, but to a situation where things are getting stabilized. At the same time, we see also a spread of the virus, and this, I mean, you're based in India and in the US, basically. I mean, it's a totally different situation over there. And it can come back also in Europe. It is a very, very weak, let's say, situation that we are in. And that means that we need to be aware. And this is also has its impact on the economic performance of the European countries, which is the, let's say, the main focus of my presentation this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are. What we see is a huge economic catastrophe. I mean, we see figures that have not been met or have not been seen since the world crisis in the early 1930s. We see a decrease of economic growth by 7% expected for this year. It might even become bigger. You see the graph shows you the growth rates in the first quarter of 2020, which are probably less severe. I mean, less severe indeed that in comparison to what we might expect later this year. And we see also a big disparities between the different countries. So France, Italy, Spain are among the countries hit hardest by the economic crisis. Some countries have not even seen a decrease in its economic development, but that might change also later during this year. So this is a far from positive view. What we also see is that there are huge, incredibly huge investments in the economy. I mean, the European Union invests almost 4 trillion of euros in the economy. And member states invest now between almost 1 and 10% of their GDP, according to varying between the different countries. So Italy is spending less, and Germany is spending a lot of money now in its economy. The same also applies. It's a bit less than for Germany, but we also invest in the Netherlands like 8% of our GDP in boosting the economy. But at the same time, what the crisis also shows are the vulnerabilities of society. We see different sectors that are hit hard. I think this is a global pattern. Tourism and travel are almost next to zero. We're gradually restarting now tourism, and in some countries, especially in the Southern European countries, tourism is extremely important. Up to 10–20% of the national GDP is dependent on tourism. But at the same time, we see that people are afraid of traveling, and it will probably the figures will probably remain extremely low also for travel. We see also that the retail industry is hit hard, except for the fast moving consumer goods and some online retail shops and the delivery services. Airlines are next to zero as well. We're gradually now recovering. And this is sometimes forgotten, but leisure and the arts, I mean, the situation there is absolutely dramatic. But we also see, and this is one of the main angles of viewing also the COVID-19 crisis, is that it reveals the inequalities in society, and it sort of magnifies what has always been there, but now in a much more dramatic way. We see the struggle for space, especially during lockdown periods. I mean, there's a lack of public space. I think in countries like India, this is extremely complex, of course, but also, I mean, in a different perspective, obviously, but in a historic city center like Amsterdam, with very narrow streets sometimes, or in Southern European countries, this is a huge problem. We have also, I mean, limited space in housing, and this is an issue that we need to think of. Also, I mean, looking ahead, so how to sort of have a different vision on housing and living now that people are working more and more from home. This will have a huge impact also on offices in cities. I think we will go to a situation where people will continue to work more from home. This whole lockdown has been characterized by agencies also as the largest global experiment in teleworking. I can say for myself also, I've been working in my home in Amsterdam now for the past 4 months. And for some professions like mine, this is not really a problem. I mean, we also discovered that we can do a lot of things. We miss the social context, obviously, but we do not need to travel all the time. I mean, I had a job where I traveled a lot to other European countries, sometimes also outside Europe, sometimes even for conferences of one day or meetings of one day. This is not always necessary. We also discovered the advantages of teleworking and of digital tools. But we see also the let's say, a new sort of a precariat, a social precariat that was there, of people who are self-employed, who are now absolutely, I mean, who got out of jobs, the short-term contract workers in different forms of industry, the migrant labor workers in different industries who are extremely vulnerable, live under difficult conditions. The situation of women also, we see violence, home violence in many households, and cities are dealing with that as well. We also see the whole situation of the, let's say, what I would like to call cost marginalization, the only for profit driven industries. And in various European countries, the meat processing industries are now hotspots also of the virus spread. It's not only because of the meat production itself, which is also something which is not sustainable, of course, but it's also the living conditions and the working conditions of basically migrant work. In the European case, workers coming from former Eastern European countries. We see also issues in fur farms, for instance. So there are different aspects and sectors of society which are more vulnerable or which are more problematic than others, and we need to think about that. And in a much more general and abstract way, we also need to think about the, let's say, the global economy has been so, let's say, perfectly organized almost in a way that it was only based on just-in-time global supply chains. This is something that will change. We saw also the vulnerabilities of that, and there's a new debate about deglobalization, about or re-globalization in a different way of making combinations of just-in-time supply chains to just-in-case supply chains, where you are much more prepared for robustness. And this is, I think, also the way forward. If we look at the responses from at the European level, the first emergency response was to freeze the current situation, the status quo, actually, to prevent workers from being totally jobless as far as possible, to guarantee jobs in businesses, and to prevent bankruptcy. We're now in Europe we're in the second phase of this development. We see that we need to make also choices about which companies to support, which companies are really viable. Do we need to go back to the old normal, or do we need to invest in new societies, or in new businesses? We also need to take into account the shifting patterns in society during the lockdown. I already mentioned teleworking, but not only that, it's also the shifting balance between public and private. Many of the services have been privatized in the past. We now see with the Corona crisis response that the public sector, to some extent, is back again. And that also requires, let's say, a new thinking about public-private partnerships. And we also see new sectors in society that were almost, well, I'm not saying forgotten, but that were neglected to a large extent because the salaries were extremely low. This was the healthcare, but also other services. They now deserve also new forms of support. What will be really interesting, I think, is now to prepare for the really post-COVID recovery. We're now in Europe gradually opening up very, very prudently because the risks are still there. The virus is still there among us, and it can come back any moment. We know that. We saw that also in other countries. But we need to have a public discussion on what are the common goods actually in society? What are the really, let's say, the basic values? And how can we really benefit from the green and digital economy? This is part in Europe of a Green Deal of the European Commission. It is also part of one of the strategic urban agendas that I have been working on with the now German presidency. One of the aspects that we promote in that strategic document is a balance between green, just, and productive city models. And some cities actually are, although they do not use these typologies, but they are working in that perspective. And that is the example that I would like to highlight here, which is the Amsterdam City Donut. Many of you might know Kate Raworth's donut model. The interesting thing is that the city of Amsterdam, with a green local government, has fully embraced the, let's say, the model of Kate Raworth and has embedded it in a new kind of thinking or new strategy to make Amsterdam a 100% circular city by 2050. The interesting thing is that it really combines different skills in the national level, but also the European levels with the global targets, including most of the SDGs actually. So how to make a connection between the social foundations, which is at the heart of the donut, with the different aspects, including the ecological ceiling, also the aspects of climate change and biodiversity and natural resources. Amsterdam is one of the 3 pilot cities, and it is really interesting to follow that model to see how it will develop. In practice, it means that we would need to rethink the value chains when it comes to food production, to the way we process organic materials, but also how to consume goods, of course. I mean, how are they produced? How can we also make them more sustainable? Or how can we change also the, let's say, the purchasing patterns or the production methods? And of course, many of those goods come from different countries. They also come from India and from China and from countries with sometimes even really poor production conditions. And this is something that also needs to be taken into account. If we only look at the cost aspects, we miss essential parts of the donut. And it also means that we need to look differently at the built environment. It means that we need to reassess the global and the local supply chains to review them. And I had discussions with the colleagues from the city of Amsterdam, and they told me it is sometimes so difficult to change the local supply chains. It's sometimes much easier to work with the existing global supply chains, even though they are not always fully sustainable. But we need to make small steps to change this, and this will be a long-term project. If we really want to invest in fair trade purchasing, for instance, you need to review all the different patterns, and city governments can make a boost here also. They can invest also much more in a repair economy. That means that you need to review all the different steps of your production processes, and that's a huge challenge. The interesting thing is that Amsterdam is actually insisting in that. But it also means, if we really work towards a more green and digital economy, that we need to invest a lot in new skills for new jobs, actually, because we know that some of the existing jobs, they will disappear, and we need to change that. And that means that we really need to prepare for that, because if we want to learn something from this crisis, and this saying, never waste a good crisis, well, this is a unique moment, perhaps in history, a turning point, I hope at least, that will allow us to think differently about this, to make cities more robust, to make cities more resilient, to deal with these, let's say, destructive aspects of the current crisis. And with that, I would like to open the floor to end my presentation, and indeed to open the debate with the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Again, sorry for missing out on your presentation. So since we have asked already a question to Mr. Parthasarathy, I will go to Ms. Bansal. And Ms. Bansal, how can startups help SMEs and public institutions in making them more efficient? Thank you.
Thank you, Vatsal and Martin, for very interesting and insightful presentations that give us a sense of what is happening in other parts of the world. I think if we look back at what has happened in the last 3 months, one is it has been an absolutely unprecedented time. This has broken all playbooks. And so new playbooks are being written by government, by industry, by startups, and by civil society on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So there are many silver linings that have also emerged. And I think subsequently I will speak about them. But one of the biggest things is an unprecedented collaboration between government, industry, so India Inc., if you will, the startup ecosystem, and civil society. So the coming together to use the technology, and usually technology-led innovation in startup business models, and apply them to problems at scale to which they might otherwise not have been applied. And this is as simple as things about getting your daily supply chain running. We spoke about the interruption of supply chain. That is, in fact, frankly, one of the first things we saw at an individual, everyday level, the breakdown and the immediate halt of the grocery supply chain. So the enabling, the e-enabling of the kirana, the e-enabling of your everyday vendor, your micro entrepreneur, your dhobi, your sabjiwala, your milkman, and so on. Actually, that has been one of the most dramatic things. At the city level, engaging with cities, with municipalities, state governments, and indeed with the national government on creating, again, large supply chain projects, very organic, very collaborative, but also things around creating, for example, in Bangalore, the startup ecosystem came together to create the Bangalore model for actually contact tracing. Same thing happened in Kerala. Arogya Setu has been put together in India, and literally like a 2-week sprint with the collaborative effort of 2 or 3 very prominent startups, and everyone's done it at a completely voluntary level. So there are many ways that this energy can be harnessed through collaborative efforts for solving issues both at local urban levels, national levels, and certainly for MSMEs. And when I know you are doing a round robin, Vatsal, when it comes back to me, I will speak a little bit more about some examples there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bansal. Now we will go to Mr. Unhale. Mr. Unhale, how can we track socio-economic changes in urban spaces on a continuous basis? Thank you.
That's a great question, but am I audible? Yeah, to start with, I think, I would just like to dwell some words on the smart city phenomena. It has been quite a popular concept and the discussion. So smart city, in my view, is basically an approach. which tries to garner all the technological benefits that are available. Cities are extremely complex systems. Running a modern city is an extremely complex phenomena. The data points, the decision process, the real-time responses, the immediate responses that you require are really stupendous. And it is obvious that the technological benefits that we have, which have been used in other sectors so strongly, needs to be garnered and used in running cities everywhere. So that's the basic underlying, concept as to what really goes in running a smart city. And secondly, smart city is a relatively new introduction in the urban ecosystem. If you think of India's urban ecosystem, I believe is in absolute terms, it is the third largest country in the world. If you add up all the urban population that we have in India, I think its population will be more than the United States of all the cities. So it's a very important system that has to engage with how the globe will respond to the coming challenges of urbanization. That was my basic take on smart cities, firstly. And secondly, of course, we will have to understand the larger global framework onto which we all are trying to work. India is a signatory for the UN Habitat and the declarations and the Quito Declaration that we had. We are a signatory for the new urban agenda. India is, of course, a very prominent member in the sustainable development goals that the global efforts are taking place. And this does set up a context for the actions that you might find even in the smallest of the municipality of India. Currently, the urban population is believed to be around more than 40 crores in India. There is 400, almost half a billion, around half a billion. That's the reason I'm saying that cities in India are, the third largest country in the world. Regarding socioeconomic changes, I believe in this, if you really look at the broader perspective, we realize there is a certain peculiarities of global south. When I say global south, I consider India, of the South Asia, maybe Asian countries. Of course, Africa is very much a part of the global south, and so is the Latin American countries. So when we take this broader perspective from starting from South America to maybe Philippines, for that matter, the entire global south, you realize it has certain peculiarities. One, of course, need of inclusion is very much. So the base of our pyramid, so to use, if one tries to use that, the foundation of the country's economy, so to say, does depends a large extent on the inclusion strategies and the ability of inclusion strategies to cater to our urban poor, which is in substantial number. What you see as slums is essentially an aspect of urban poverty and the need of inclusion that is required. So in this context, the socioeconomic changes that needs to be tracked in real time is indeed a very, very important approach to this. Recently, after the COVID lockdown, and a lot of impact was felt on the urban poor, especially the street vending had to be stopped, the street vending had to be regulated. You had certain issues of the daily needs and as we call the mates and coming into the housing societies, giving their services. So the brunt on the urban poor was quite significant, and a lot of steps therefore were taken onto that. So again, the real-time data acquisition, the use of big data, use of maybe the command control centers will go in a very big way of finding this information and giving real-time responses. So I mean, right now, Anjali ma'am did say about how the e-groceries take up. I think it's a small of that. You will find street vendors now. Street vendors are now slowly adopting to this new normal, as we say. And as was rightly pointed out, this is the biggest. It's a big wave actually. This pandemic is a big wave. It can be a tsunami. So whether to get swept away by this wave or to ride on this wave will depend upon how we collaboratively work together. And accelerated implementation, as Partha sir said, we require tremendous speed in our response. We cannot have the lethargy or the red tapeism or the typical to put in the elephant responding and moving. No, we require a very agile, warlike, active elephant parts of that. So that was my just take on the need and the potential of socioeconomic tracking, the real-time socioeconomic changes. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Onhale. That was great.
Yeah.
Mr. Kolegi, What is the likely impact on revenue of municipal bodies, and what may be the new opportunities to explore? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I mean, besides the excellent points made by other co-panelists, I mean, the impact on urban agencies, which have really been at the front line of service delivery, and a lot of the response, whether it's relating to community food kitchens or whether it's relating to contact tracing, a lot of the expenditure burden has been at the front of the municipal bodies. Now, while the lockdown created a demand squeeze and therefore a direct impact on consumption related taxes, the impact on municipal bodies on their revenue streams is with a little lag, I would say, and it is going to be more long lasting than what we would have on consumption related tax revenues. So while the economic recovery and consumption comes back as the economy unlocks itself, what's going to the lag is going to be felt by local bodies for a much longer period. Much of the local government revenues is driven by property related taxes. Of course, they were already feeling the crunch for the last few years, driven by slowdown in real estate, driven by various other things, RERA, demonetization, overall, slower growth of capital gains in properties and so on, which was resulting in a kind of stagnation in property-driven revenues, whether it is for transaction revenues coming from transactions or revenues coming from value addition. So, so as municipalities gear up for increased OPEX on one side, and reduced operating revenues from tax revenues on one side, they're also going to be faced with changed priorities of their state and federal governments, which is going to be less on, there'll be diversion of capex towards health and social infrastructure, and therefore in countries like ours where capital is scarce, it's going to be an added challenge. So there's on the capital income side of municipal bodies too is going to see a slightly delayed but a tighter squeeze. Now, in all these conditions, the options for municipal bodies is really to innovate. I think the innovation should come both in terms of finding new revenue sources as well as finding innovations in defraying their costs. That is trying to get costs off their balance sheet. That's where innovative public-private participation models should come in, to not just look for capital investment from private side, but also to look where communities can play a role with respect to taking on some costs, which otherwise municipal bodies were executing very inefficiently. And therefore something that a municipal body spent X, a community can it actually execute the same service at a 0.8x or a 0.7x. So revenues obviously will have to innovatively also be seen from value creation and value capture that is there. Our property tax, which has been one of the oldest sources of real estate value capture, is completely underutilized, or this potential really not adequately brought in. This is where again digital analysis, data analysis, as Mr. Unhale rightly brought in, it's bringing a sweeping culture change in municipal governance where it is a more data-driven decision support. I think this should now extend itself to other aspects of governance other than these real-time operational issues, but also whether it is relating to taxation, whether it's relating to better urban planning and so on. So those are municipalities will need to dig themselves in for the long haul with these kind of slightly cultural shifts they've had, but actually make it something that pervades their way of working, and that will now need to start chipping into the revenue side of it.
Thank you. I think we are running a little behind time, so we need to request everybody to, speed up and shorten their answers, please. So now going back to Mr. Parthasarathy, what may be the key challenges for manufacturers in next 6 to 12 months?
Thank you again. And your brevity has brought some kind of formula for everything. So I would say 5 S's: survival, safety, supply chain stability, and agility. Yeah, system agility. So survival, you all know, cash, you don't run out of cash. So first is get out of this system. Safety is balancing operations and safety. We are finding that when you go back, people get COVID again in the shop floor. Then what do? Do you stop all over and then get back? So that's an important. Third is supply chain. How to restore operation and retain customers. In our case, many of the workers have gone back home. So how do you get back this entire workforce and operational? Stability includes risk management, volatility, and supply and demand. Today, tractors, they will consume as much as you can produce. So how do you manage this? Yeah, even in an unknown version. And the last one is system agility. If you don't know how many hubs you are going to have, how many humps you are going to have, then you need to make sure that there is system agility. So that's the fifth one. You have 1.5 minutes, please.
Actually, that is really bringing back us to that discussion. So I appreciate that, Mr. Parthasarathy. We'll go to Ms. Bansal. Ms. Bansal, what kind of filtration process for funds would follow while financing startups? Thank you.
So there's no particular change really from the COVID pandemic, other than one. So I'll come back to that. In general, when we look at, and different funds obviously have different strategies. But if we think about what Avana does, and we look at technology-led innovation that can lead to large scale impact outcomes, in addition to generating very strong financial returns. Our portfolio is like that, whether you take a delivery or an urban company or a loan tap, they're taking a very significant innovation to existing business models, but using technology, driving that innovation, scaling up, and then creating access to jobs, formalization, inclusive growth, but also a lot of commercial financial return value. So these are very successful companies. I think VCs and funds generally tend to look for what is the big problem that you're solving, and hence consequently size of market, size of revenue pool. One of the things that has changed, and I think it's a very positive change, is there is a renewed focus on profitability and sustainability of companies. So Partha mentioned survival. So there was a massive sort of shift towards, will this company survive? How much cash runway does it have? But the reality is, beyond the first few years, why should a company need to continuously look at a cash runway? There should be enough value being generated in the business on a sustainable basis, so you're not dependent on burn. I think that is the only change that has really happened, with a much greater focus on profitability. We continue to look at exceptional entrepreneurs who not only have the bright idea, but also the passion, the energy, and the commitment. Because entrepreneurship is not easy. It goes through more downs than ups. We only in media hear about the unicorns, etc., but you don't hear about the grind it took to get there. So we continue to look for entrepreneurs who have those qualities and who are very, very resilient. And I have seen such incredibly positive sort of pivots take place. Take, for example, in education, who would have thought that all kinds of schools, not just sort of universities and colleges and public and private schools, but even public schools and government schools will be able to make the shift to online almost immediately. So we are seeing a spurt in edtech. We are seeing a lot of growth in work from home support technologies, so SaaS-based models that allow collaborative working and virtual working. I think MSME digitization is, again, an area of great opportunity. We are doing some very interesting work with the NITI Aayog right now on new models for MSME digitization. And it's not necessary that it needs to come from the large company or the large bank ecosystem. Actually, a lot of these are coming from the fintechs because they see the opportunity there. And they're able to with great agility, evolve their business models. And then finally, and it's not as an urban issue, but it does impact your last mile supply chain, is agri. So the farm to fork and the digitization of supply chains is another very, very interesting trend, which will impact urban dwellers in addition to impacting the rural ecosystem.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Bansal. We'll go to Mr. Onhale. Mr. Onhale, how are cities, and in particular, some of the smart cities, are responding to pandemic crisis? Thank you.
In fact, it has almost been for 3.5 or 15 weeks now that all the, or as I say, urban ecosystem is responding to this the suddenness of the COVID was something that was really surprising. People never expected, never really comprehended this what geometric progression really can be. With the number of patients what you had 2 weeks back, we normally express a linear progression on that and not a geometric one. And that really hit like a tsunami impact. That's number one. So what I'm trying to share is that the entire urban ecosystem is responding to it. as I said, smart city is basically it becomes a nodal sort of a hub, which really tries to connect all these agencies together, because that is into the structure of the smart city. It's a company, it's not a government per se. It's a company registered under the Companies Act, and it has taken important stakeholders from the government, central government, state government, and other parastatals into the fold of smart city, which becomes coordination becomes much easier. So, in fact, almost 46 cities in India have an effective and working command control center, and this command control center got turned up into a war room for responses not only at city level and the district level. So, I think that was a very immediate response which the smart cities command control center had. There were a lot of apprehensions about the investment that went into the smart cities earlier when they were being built. But now the way they are responding, I'm sure the public apprehension regarding this has gone down. Secondly, of course, the use of ICT. In fact, Anjali ma'am said that the way e-groceries came up, I think that really helped. I mean, in fact, in the case of lockdowns, in fact, when we were enforcing the containment plans and ensuring uh, uh, ensuring that there's no people move out, and at that time the entire the grocery supply chain and the vendor supply chain, the way it shifted, and it was facilitated by the ICT apps, not only in Thane, which I was working earlier, but also in Mumbai. This Mumbai may not be formally a part of the smart city mission, but it is smart enough to use all the, and in fact the use of Twitter, which I'm seeing in BMCGM, is really great. A lot of transparency is coming up, a lot of information is getting shared. So the use of apps, of course, Arogya Setu was mentioned. It's again the response of the central smart city mission office, which has gone into connecting all these things together, has been to a great extent helping the way the efforts are getting responded to that. And I believe getting all the disparate agencies together was the most difficult task at this moment, and which has been done. The use of trace track, again, it was mentioned that the tracking and tracing program has been extensively used. The use of Arogya Setu is being now available on the dashboard to most of the city administrators. We have predictively, we are getting prediction onto which area might come up into an hotspot, and preventive measures for that are getting done. So I believe there's a lot to be done more, but yes, it is. We are absolutely definitely on the right track on. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Onhale. That was great. We'll go to Mr. Kolagi. Mr. Kolagi, what kind of shifts are required, public-private partnerships, in order to make them more feasible and attractive for private sector? Thank you.
So in the realm of public-private partnerships in the current context and current economic context, I think first is it should be more explored in areas where there is immediate priority, which is in the realm of MSMEs, market infrastructure. It is impacting the informal livelihoods. So infrastructure that can be quickly put in place to support the smaller enterprises and who are not part of large supply chains but who are dependent on urban consumption. There, I think they should quickly look for public-private partnership models. The second is, as I mentioned, where local governments can also quickly look at getting communities to take over assets and operations of stuff which municipal governments were struggling to actually manage because of inadequate last mile oversight or inadequate kind of capability. Is where they should look at public-private partnerships. Typically, PPPs in municipal space have been, urban space have been looked at where there is a real estate component. I think whatever is critical in terms of transport nodes and those need to be done in. Other than that, currently the appetite is honestly quite low. So municipalities should refocus on those priority areas right now.
Thank you, Mr. Kolagi. Martin, we missed asking your question last time, so I'll try to catch up on that. So what do you think from European cities and administrators? How are they dealing with it? And what do you think their responses are? And how much they are looking into this discussion?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question, Vatsal. Could you please repeat that one?
Sure. The question is how administrators and city officials in Europe are dealing with some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think the first response of cities was actually to provide support to businesses and to people who are, let's say, hardest hit by the economic crisis. So how to prevent that they simply mean that they cannot survive. That was absolutely the first response. What we also see is that cities were struggling a lot with what we call well, at least in the Netherlands, but in many other countries, it's sort of similar. In the Netherlands, we call it the 1.5 meter society, which is now sort of the new normal. This has a huge impact, of course, and so cities were actually absolutely busy with sort of reorganizing public space, but also reorganizing space in retail shops, for instance. Now that we are gradually opening up in many European countries with all the difficulties, because sometimes we need to close down again, we see that, yeah, we need to find sort of a new balance. Opening up shops, opening up also theaters, for instance. But to give you a few examples, in a theater, it's allowed now to have 30 to 100 people, still maintaining this 1.5 meter distance of social distancing. So these are huge challenges that cities are dealing with. So how to survive in an economy that would need to deal with this 1.5 meter social distancing? I think this is the hugest challenge, and for some businesses this will be extremely difficult. I think for restaurants or for cafes, I mean, I think they have found, most of them have found ways to do this, but for some other industries this is extremely difficult. And we see the problems, for instance, in the meat industry, the meat processing industry. Here things go absolutely wrong. And there have been outbursts of COVID spread viruses, especially in these sectors, also in firm farms, for instance, where we see new cases of contamination. And this also shows how complex the situation is, because it's not just, of course, the 1.5 meter social distancing. We also need to look into the labor conditions and the living conditions of these workers. And most of them are, especially in the meat processing industry, not just in the Netherlands, but it's the same situation in other countries, in Germany and in France also, that these are migrant workers coming from former Eastern European countries, where many people live in small apartments, share sometimes even bedrooms, I don't know, because indeed we are that eager to eat meat at a very low price. And this questions, of course, society at a much, let's say, much more fundamental level. I think we need to have a discussion on that. I mean, how to change these production methods. And I think cities are dealing with that as well. But at the moment, I think it's just that we are experimenting now with this 1.5 meter society. And we need to learn. We learn on a daily basis how to deal with it. And that's the biggest challenge for now.
Thank you, Martin. It's 15 minutes left, and I would encourage all the participants, audience members, to provide their questions here, like Kapil has provided. So to all panelists, I will start with this question from Kapil. How can we design more of a climate-sensitive city model, taking in consideration the factors of finance? So climate-sensitive model with finance. I would like to have one or two panel members address this. And then if at all there are not many questions, we will go back to our moderated questions. Thank you.
I'm happy to take a stab at that. Climate sensitivity impacts, I think, includes really how do we have more sustainable, renewable energy, better use and conservation of water, as well as much more sort of a recycling green mindset. So I think all three go together. In countries like ours, where we get so much sunshine, there is very little reason why we should not actually be adopting rooftop solar, for example, as a solution. And these things actually become quite effective in high density areas as well. Additionally, creating mohalla recycling, where you do recycling at home, recycling in your community in a neighborhood basis. India, actually, the traditional culture had been a recycling culture. We never threw away anything. We didn't use disposable anything. And going back to childhood, we were always told by our parents, how can you waste this? And as we have, in some ways, quote unquote, developed and progressed, We have forgotten that to some extent. So it is time to go back to that. I think Martin mentioned, or maybe Vatsal, you mentioned the California drought. One of the things that the California drought created was an acute sensitivity to use of water in California. And I'm a frequent visitor, and I saw how many of my friends actually, America is a very plentiful, abundant society. But they became so acutely conscious of water usage to the extent of sort of shifting from washing by hand, which we think of as a sort of piety in some ways, to saying no, let's kind of collect everything and wash it together because it conserves water. So I think there are many things we can do individually. I will probably turn to Mr. Kaulagi or Mr. Unhale to talk what you can do actually systematically and systemically at a city level.
So Vatsal, if I can come in here, one of the big
Thank
challenges.
you.
Yeah, one of the big challenges this pandemic has placed is on our public transport systems. From a transportation perspective, what was always considered as a more viable model was to move from an individual and collective perspective to public transit with social distancing. That is bringing back the aspect of private transport. But here is where green transport makes a big possibility of something that's viable and requires less capital or viable capital, and at the same time addresses the challenges that the pandemic has brought on us, which is essentially walkability and cycling and non-motorized transport. So bringing emphasis in, it is trying to get back the emphasis of mixed use for urban planners, which can reduce the trip lengths, which can bring in people being able to address a lot of their commute needs just by cycling and walkability, and that brings in the element of green and at the same time viable transport modes.
Thank you. I think that was great. Now, do any one of the panel members like Martin or Mr. Unhale would like to comment, or do you want to go back to our moderated ones? Thank you.
A very short from my side, just to mention that I second the thoughts about climate sensitivity, and indeed, I think in Europe we can now learn perhaps from India and tradition of the repair economy, because indeed we were so much used to throw away goods that we now need to look back if we want to really take circularity more seriously. And indeed, we also see how important it is to invest in nature-based solutions, especially now. I think within the context of this COVID crisis, that we need the green spaces, that we need to green roofs, we need to invest in more sustainable forms of energy supply. About mobility, I just want to mention, and that's my last remark, that on the 17th of July we will have another Urban Thinkers webinar, campus webinar specifically on urban mobility, and there we will talk indeed about the importance of active modes of mobility like walking and biking and car sharing or scooter sharing, which is an interesting initiative also in India. So we'll come back to that in a dedicated session. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Probably we would want to go to Mr. Parthasarathy or Mr. Unhale.
I just wanted to make one comment before we went to Unhale. And this is about designing more of a climate sensitive city. Delhi, amongst others, I don't want to single out, but just taking an example, Delhi has showed us that we better do something before it is done unto us. We are forced to do, or we do once to do. So whoever a couple, absolutely, we have to design climate sensitive environment and cities. In fact, center saying, I'll give you funds when you are climate sensitive, when you take carbon targets, reduction targets, when we all focus on that. And it has to be at 4 levels. And at all levels, financing should have a gate. Now, ESG companies are given money. Companies who are more focused on ESG are given money. It is time cities also replicate that model. And I think there is a lot of merit in what you have said. I will only want to second that.
Thank you. Mr. Onale, brief comments, or we should go to the next one?
I think the importance of climate smart cities have been acknowledged even by the central ministry, and there is a special cell that actually is functioning on that. And very soon, hopefully, we should have credible actions, and action plans which will be executed in most of the cities of India. Yeah, thank you.
If I may, I would
Please.
fully endorse the whole thought around carbon credits for cities also. Much like companies get rewarded for good ESG, cities should also get rewarded and penalized for good or bad ESG. I think there's nothing as powerful as an incentive program, reward recognition, and consequences.
Vatsal ji,
Perfect.
this
We
is
have more.
Praveen here.
We have.
There are 3 questions by the audience. You can look at the question and answer panel.
Thanks, Praveen. So we have another question: how slum development and rehabilitation schemes needed to be revamped in response to the pandemic? I think we would have only one answer right now, so that we can go to a couple other questions as well. Thank you.
I would just like to add here, what is being done for slum development and rehabilitation, right from maybe almost 2 decades now. We are having various programs for develop the slums. I will just share what was being tried at Thane called as the cluster development program, in which it is a strategy, it's a framework which allows incentives to be given to additional FSI for including the old and the congested part of cities executed as per the new urban plans and get it subsidized by the real estate price differential which exists in the TDI. So new approach which is being tried along with the traditional slum rehabilitation program which was done in Mumbai, and it is one of its projects is under the smart city. So hopefully the new framework should be in position to help redevelop the slum area and the congestion and the Gauthan area that we call it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanhale. That was a question from Vishnu Narayan. And we have another question from Amit Sonavane. Amit is asking how MSME will help financially in terms of innovation in affordable housing and recycling of construction waste. So how MSME can help for affordable housing and recycling of construction waste? Who would like to take it up? Only one answer, please.
I will just share one thing here that the C&D waste recycling to framework exists under the environmental acts, various environmental acts. So every cities ought to have a construction and debris disposable framework. Projects are coming up in city. I think Thane is also one of the cities we had is this C&D project. New Mumbai has it. I think Delhi has it. Jaipur has it. So this C&D recycling of C&D waste and using it into construction is already being executed in some parts of India as of now.
Thank you. Would someone like to answer the affordable housing question for innovation and finance? Go ahead, Ms. Colleague.
One of the pandemic has also thrown up one housing need which wasn't adequately looked at is essentially the rental housing and rental for non-standard family units. That is essentially single male workers or single women workers. And that's a very large segment of the migrants who have actually faced a challenge with job losses or the kind of lockdown situations that have been there. So this is a segment where there needs to be a lot more investment. This is a segment where the rental yields are better than what is there for conventional family units. And this is a segment where with some level of government intervention in land, and we have worked on multiple models for this for government institutions to show that if the land price can be in a way subsidized and so on, there can be actually sustainable private investment for rental housing for non-standard family units, and also where this rental projects can actually come up in offering a much better quality of life than today what they have to access affordable rental in congested urban villages, as what we call very unplanned areas with very little urban amenities.
Thank you. We have a question from Professor Vibhuti Sachdev. She's asking what new jobs you will think will emerge in the urban realm and how do we prepare for those? Mr. Parthasarathy?
Yeah, I think you can have a trial, okay, TRAIL. So I just said technology will give you the biggest bang for it. Recycling will be a big thing which will come in and will create lots of job around it. Innovation is going to be one of this, and affordable housing, affordable many things will be part of this. Alternate energy will bring in many more jobs on it, and that's the A of it. And L is learning will never go out of fashion. So there'll be a lot of educational mindset. So the baptism by trial.
So we have two more questions, but I think we are already cutting into Mr. Khosla's time. So I would hand it over to Mr. Khosla. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vatsal. But I just have one question for Anjali, and this is very important in the context as to what should the system be doing to support women. So a very quick answer, Anjali, if you can.
I can say a lot, but I'm actually going to turn to system designers like Mr. Unhale, Mr. Kaulagi, and Mr. Grisel to actually respond to that. I will, however, preface that question to my fellow panelists by saying that, you know, when work from home started at the beginning of the lockdown, we said, yay, this is a great sort of flag, and work from home becomes the norm, more women will be able to participate. What we started hearing, however, is that the burden of domestic work, now that everybody was working from home, children, spouses, extended families, was falling disproportionately on women. We've had a lot of discussion today around urban design, but nothing around engendering it. So when we talk about mobility, for example, a big question there is how do you make mobility accessible, safer for women so that they can actually participate in the workforce more effectively? So those are just thoughts from me. What should the system do? I will turn it over actually to the experts on this panel who do urban planning and urban design. I'm sure they have a lot more to share.
If I can chip in, and I always feel that women are much more stronger than males. I mean, it's just not a cliche, but they are much more stronger, much more resilient, much more innovative. So I personally feel that it's not that help that we have to give to them. It's just a small support which will, you know, fire their abilities and ambitions, and they will do wonders. So we'll have to stop seeing women as, you know, someone who is weak, requiring support. They are very strong and always admire. Thank you.
Martin, would you?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Srinivas, all I said is, Anjali, this is one of the topics for us to take much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very much on our agenda for the chamber, actually. So we will invite input from our panelists here, even on a going forward basis.
Just wanted to add that in this era where digital technologies are becoming a major channel for reskilling, my take is that I think women will adapt to it a lot more proactively, and the more it is enabled, I think they will use this opportunity to actually leapfrog into new jobs, new skills that are developing, and so on. I in a way second Mr. Unhale that, you know, just some enablers are to be created, but I think they will respond even better.
Can I take half a minute, please? This is more to kind of appeal to all the panelists that we are working for a, you know, city-based gender diversity agenda in which, you know, how do we make women much more feel part and able to join the workforce more in numbers. And I think therefore Anjali is turning it back to you so that they can get input, and IFC and Bombay Chambers is doing a joint program to develop the ecosystem. So please do feed in as much as you can. It's 2 minutes of selling, but I suppose the agenda makes it an excuse.
Very much. Thank you so much, Partha, for making the pitch. And now we will keep going back to our experts as we progress with the study.
Thank you. And Martin, would you like to add a quick bit on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm thinking to what extent about the relation between urban design and planning and the gender issue. I mean, there are relations. We look at mobility, for instance, safety in the public space. I mean, these are by definition urban issues. But we also see that, and I was really shocked to read that in the newspapers, that domestic violence was becoming a big issue in different countries. And sometimes we tend to think that in Northwestern Europe, men are that well emancipated that it does not happen. Well, it's not the case. I mean, these are alarming issues. And I saw that some cities indeed are actually indeed setting up programs to combat domestic violence. Even cities in countries which you would expect to be, let's say, really modern and progressive, like Sweden. I read that Malmö city, for instance, had a specific program. But we have the same problems also in the Netherlands, in France, in Spain. It is a general problem. And it means that we also need to start, I think, in education. I think this is perhaps more the solution to really combat this, I don't know, bizarre and disturbing feeling among men that they can treat women not as their equals. I mean, I think this should become totally normal. And I think that at schools, in families, we need to provide schemes to support that, to make sure that this will not happen in any, let's say, in a near future, because it's totally unacceptable.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. And, I'm going to get some brownie points for asking this question simply because I have 3 women at home and they're going to be happy that, this is the question which needed answered. So thank you everyone for your perspective. We've got so many inputs here, right from Partha telling us about the 3 R's and the 5 S's and the trial. And I think survival safety is going to be very, very important as we go along in the coming months. Anjali giving us perspective as to how smart the small E trader has been, the grocery chap who we thought, are not as educated as some of the bigger ones, but they were the first to respond. Srinivas told us about infrastructure. Vatsal gave us a perspective of the US, including what's happening in Philadelphia, California. Martin giving us perspective about the European, how they are tackling, how Germany and Italy are doing different things. So all in all, I think this is a very, very interesting session. But I like what Partha said, saying that, something which we should have done 20 years back, we've got an opportunity. As all of us look out of a window daily, we see a clear sky, we see non-pollution, we see less crowd. This is a time where how do we sustain and maintain these some of these aspects, how Mr. Unale and his ilk can get the municipality to work far, far greater in achieving these objectives, I think would be key for us to move forward. I would also like to thank some of our partners, National Institute of Urban Affairs, Government of India, New Delhi, Sushant School of Planning and Development, Ansal University, Gurgaon, US Green Building Council, Washington, DC, European Urban Knowledge Network, The Hague, Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Chennai, Regional Studies Association, and finally, US Habitat for encouraging us to hold this discussion. Thank you, Vatsal, and thank you, everyone. Participants, thank you for asking questions, staying with us. I'm sure this would have been very interesting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Special thanks to the moderator who, in spite of being an expert, let the novices speak.
Very true. Thank you, everyone.
Very true. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Praveen
Very interesting
and
conversation.
yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Praveen, Minal, thank you, and Mahadev behind
Thank
this.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks all of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
sir. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And Praveen and everybody, well done.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, indeed. Well done. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.